In this video, we're going to take a look at a small program that's going to be working with an array of integers. And we're just going to trace through the program, watch as our array gets created. Then we're going to process the array with a for loop, which is something we do a lot. Because those index numbers run from 0 to whatever the one less than the size of the array is, we can write loops that count through and process each of the elements in an array. And we do it all the time, so we're going to take a look at that as we go through this, and we're just going to access some values in the array just to kind of see how it works. Now here's the program we're going to use. We're declaring and creating an array of ints of size 5. So this is going to be an array that holds 5 integers. We're going to call the array values. Okay, so it's an array of ints called values. We create the new array object here of size 5 and assign it to this variable called values. And then we get into the for loop. And then I'll go through the for loop as we go. But to start out, I'm just going to put a breakpoint on this line, this very first line where our array gets created. We'll run our program and we'll run that line and take a look at it. So I'm going to run it with debugging. All right, so this highlighting green, this is the next statement that's going to run, is the statement that creates the object and assigns it to the variable called values. So I'm going to use a step over here. And down here, we can see in our variables window, remember if you don't see the variables window, you can go up to Window, Debugging, and click on Variables and it will appear. Okay, but you can see values is here, and if I expand it, I can see values sub 0, sub 1, 2, 3, 4, and when the array was initially created, remember the default values for each of those got set to 0. So array sub 0 equals 0, array sub 1 equals 0, array sub 2 equals 0, 3 equals 0, and array sub 4 equals 0. So now we have a small for loop here. In this for loop, I want to caution you about something in this example. This example starts at 0, or excuse me, it starts at 1. Most of the time when we set up a for loop to process an entire array, it will start at 0 because element 0 is where we start. But you'll see in this next line that I'm trying to access an index number of I minus 1. If I start at 0 here, that would give me a -1, and -1 is not an index number I can use. So this particular example starts at 1, where most times you'll see for loops for processing arrays start at 0. Okay. So this for loop is going to start at 1. I is going to be set to 1. We're going to go as long as I is less than 5. Which means it's going to count 1 through 4. And each time we're going to increase I by 1. So I'll go ahead and step over that first line. And we have I down here is set to 1 is our first value. And now let's look at what this line is going to do. It's going to take I, which in this case is, if we look down here, I is set to 1, or we can just hover over it and it tells us I equals 1. And then it's going to add to that 1 values sub, and it's going to take I and subtract 1 from it. So this will be value sub 0. So it's going to get the value of I sub 0, which is 0. So 1 plus this, which evaluates to 0, gives us a value of 1, and we're going to store that in values sub 1 because I equals 1. So I do that, and look, I sub 1 is equal to 1. All right, we're going to come up here and do this line, and I will then be equal to 2. Okay, and 2 is less than 5. So we keep working inside of our loop. This time it's going to change value sub 2, which is this line right here. Okay, it's going to use the value of I, which is 2. Then it's going to look at our array again. It's going to take 2 and subtract 1, which is 1. So it's going to look at value sub 1, which has the number 1 in it. Okay, so 2 plus 1 is 3, and we are going to store that in value sub 2, which was this one right here. And when we do it, we get a 3, and you can see it's in bold. There is no way for me to increase the font on the variables window. So you should probably be doing this along so you can watch yours. So we set value sub 1 to 1. Value sub 2 is now equal to 3. Now I equals 3, so we're going to take 3 plus the value of the previous one that we set, which was 3. So 3 plus 3 is going to equal 6, and we're going to store that in value sub 3, because I equals 3 right now. And we get 6. Okay. Keep processing our loop. Value sub I equals 4, which means we're going to be working on this line. We're going to take 4 plus the value of I sub 3, because it's 4 minus 1 here, which is 6. So 4 plus 6 equals 10. And we're going to store that in value sub 4. So this number will become 10. Okay, we increased I by 1. It became 5. 5 is not less than 5. So it's going to come down here. We're going to do this final line. And that is, we're going to set value sub 0, the one we haven't really touched yet, the first one. We're going to set it to the value sub 1 plus value sub 4. So value sub 1 is 1. Value sub 4 is 10. 1 plus 10 equals 11, and we're going to assign that to value sub 0. And there it works, and we got 11 there. So we traced through our for loop. We set some values as we went through our loop. After our loop was over, we used a couple of values out of the array to do some addition and set another element of the array to that value. And we can kind of see how one array can hold multiple values and how we can access those using the index numbers, especially using for loops with iteration variables like I, which we do quite often.